atheists. Good morning, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, free thinkers, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. Our friends and allies, you are all welcome here. We call ourselves the Seattle Atheist Church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about from the podium. So the way these talks are planned, about 6 or 7 months ago, I went to the library and I got a big stack of what I consider to be interesting books. Browsed the shelves for things that we could bring in and we could talk about. And I read the book by Brad Lamb, How to Help the One You Love. And Brad Lamb is an interventionist. So he is somebody who, if you have an addict in your family and you want to stage an intervention, you can get professional help from an interventionist. And I thought the book was very interesting and very reasonable. In some sense, it could be summed up as treat an addict like you are a reasonable person and they're a reasonable person, and work at setting boundaries. We're going to talk more about that later on in the talk. And in preparing for this talk, I also read a lot of articles by a woman named Candace Platter, who is a therapist who specializes in overcoming addictions. And I thought her website was also very good. So I recommend those two things as resources. So we're not necessarily, today when we're using the word addiction, that word can be controversial. And we don't really necessarily need to argue about the word addiction because we are looking at all kinds of things which are unhelpful or unhealthy behaviors that somebody repeatedly engages in because they get some sort of payoff from it. So overeating, undereating, gambling, compulsive shopping, compulsive sex, using porn to avoid, to be able to tune out something else, sitting in front of the television or internet for hours and days on end, over-exercising, smoking, alcoholism, narcotics addiction, and even non-compliance with medical treatment options. So anything that's not working for a person, but they keep doing it anyway. And so the strict definition of addictive has to do with whether or not somebody can develop a tolerance for it over time. So certain things like opiate pain relievers and nicotine, but that are legally addictive. And I personally would argue, I don't really understand, because I think things like sugar and salt, I do think you can develop a tolerance for them and require more to get the same experience and all of that kind of thing. But we're not going to tease out the difference between addictions and compulsions and whatever today, because I'm not so sure that it matters. If you're a 700-pound man and a crane has to lift you out of your apartment so that you can go to the hospital, I don't think it matters to you that somebody is telling you you don't actually have an addiction. So we're just talking about unhealthy behaviors, and then how do friends and family support each other in ending and overcoming those kind of behaviors. But in America today, it's estimated that 23 million Americans are addicted to alcohol or drugs. So that's at some point in their life. And that about 2/3 of those people, it's alcohol that is their drug that they abuse. And the 2/3 out of 1 in 10. 1 in 10 are addicted, and 2/3 of those people abuse alcohol at some point. But people abuse alcohol, pain relievers, and cocaine are the big ones. Which cocaine was kind of surprising to me. And obviously, they're not counting things like cigarettes, nicotine in here, right? Because it's legal. So as many as 6% of internet users also have an addictive relationship to something that they're doing online. And so I'm not talking about the 20 or 40 minutes that you're spending on Pinterest, though people have accused me of being a Pinterest addict in my own family. But I'm talking about when I started reading these stories, people spending 18 hours a day online in a chat room. And I could imagine the same kind of thing for some people who are gaming. If it's interfering with the rest of your life, if you're doing it to avoid something else, those kinds of things. And so why do people engage in addictive behaviors? It's complicated. For some people, there might be biochemical roots to it. And also, there are other psychological components to it. For example, you can't heal what you can't feel. And people use addictions as a way to stay in their comfort zone and avoid dealing with whatever is making them uncomfortable in their life. So the first thing is that somebody who is addicted needs to become willing to be uncomfortable, willing to experience that raw, uncomfortable state of emotions and physiology in order to be able to get through their addiction. For the piece about how do loved ones, family and friends help someone who's an addict, it may be possible that they also need to be willing to become uncomfortable, because often there are unhealthy codependent things going on in those relationships. If somebody finds themselves walking on eggshells around an addict, or they're afraid that if they say something they'll put their relationship in jeopardy, the first step will be to think through their own emotions and their own, what is it that they want to say and need to do in order to be an adult in the situation, and then be willing to be outside of their comfort zone. Considering the idea of attachment theory, which says that people who've had problems with their sense of self going all the way back to childhood grow up and then take on certain roles such as victims and savers, where they have problems with boundaries. And I know that there are people in church specifically who have big problems with the idea that things that happen to us very early in childhood can still affect us later on in life. And that's something that we're continuing to talk about. But nonetheless, there are patterns that we can notice and start working to change. And this victim-saver pattern, I want to read to you a quote from a blog called the Mark Manson blog, which I think really was kind of summed some things up. So he says, victims and savers both get an emotional high off one another. It's like an addiction they fulfill in one another. When presented with emotionally healthy people to date, they usually feel bored or a lack of chemistry. And they'll pass on a healthy, secure individual because a secure partner's solid boundaries does not excite the loose emotional boundaries of the needy person. So if you're in a relationship with somebody who's all kind of drama and all kind of chaos because they're involved in an active addiction, one thing to look at is, where are your healthy boundaries, and making sure that you're not starting to engage in a codependent relationship. Because if you're in a victim-saver relationship, notice that both parties must be behaving in emotionally unhealthy ways. That if you're constantly in the saver role, that you might look at your own personal boundaries. In an addict might be dealing with undiagnosed depression, and they probably have a lot of shame. Either something shameful that they feel shame about, which is causing the addictive behavior, and especially compounded by shame over the addictive behavior. So if you stage an intervention and try to talk to them about their behavior, do not use it as an opportunity to heap shame on someone. Some people have the idea that this is, for the family to really tell you how they feel, and for everybody to kind of get it off their chest and use it inappropriately to further shame someone. So the purpose of the intervention is to help someone, not just shame them. And you don't need to point out how bad the person's addiction has become, because even if you're telling yourself that the addict is in denial, usually the addict themselves actually do know already about their problem. So the addict may appear to everyone else not to realize that they have a problem, and the reason for this is that addicts frequently lie, right? It's a behavior that they will lie and minimize when they're talking to other people. but actually internally they do know, and so you don't need to shame them to point it out. So Brad Lamb was an addict of almost every substance he could ingest. And finally he thought that he would end it all by ending his life. And the one thing that stopped him was that he believed he would go to hell if he committed suicide. So when I read that, it really sent chills up my arms, because I don't believe in hell, and I don't really believe that anyone should believe in hell, but I'm certainly glad that he did at that time in his life, if that's the only thing that stopped him. And so this is definitely not an argument for believing in hell, but it just points out all the more reason that as atheists who don't believe in hell and don't teach people to believe in hell, that we need to make sure there are healthy systems in place so that, first of all, it never gets to the point where someone is now feeling that they need to end their life because they don't know what else to do, and also that if they pick up a phone to call a community mental health crisis line, that the line is there, that it's available, it's affordable, people understand that they have options. So I want to talk to you about some of Brad Lamb's suggestions and ideas about how to help people. So he says the first thing that a lot of people believe that addicts don't change. This is what he says, and I'm not sure what, I would say that I believe once an addict, always an addict. That doesn't mean that I think that once an addict, always acting out and behaving as an addict, but I do believe in that idea of when someone says, I'm in recovery, as opposed to recovered for the rest of their life. And I only say that because over the course of my life, I've known, I've had friends or whatever who have been in treatment, and I know that when they stop going to meetings, when they decide that they're cured, when they decide that they can drink again, it has only been my experience that eventually it will lead to problems. So I'm happy to talk with people about that. But I think there is a kind of change if you're an active addict and then you get sober. That's change. And he's pointing out that you can change. And one indicator that change can occur is that change spreads through social networks. So I've done studies that show that not only do people naturally gravitate towards people who are similar in weight, but that when one or two people in a social network either lose weight or gain weight, others in close proximity do too. And another thing that they noticed, that they did the same study and they showed that happiness is catching and unhappiness is catching. So I noticed this at work, there are a couple of people at work who are making healthy changes, and I noticed that it kind of inspires me to also at least think about and slightly calibrate in the direction of the healthy change. So he points out that if you're in a 12-step program, you get a sponsor, and the sponsor is someone who's been successful at the program. And in addition to that, you're encouraged to make phone calls, so you're making daily contact with somebody who's been successful, daily outreach programs with other people who are in the program, reinforcing the idea we can be successful at this. We have models and examples of people who are successful at this, okay? So if you want to help somebody, one thing is that you can always be like, hey, I'm here if you want to reach out to me. But it's especially helpful for them to also reach out to somebody who's been there, done that, and is having success. The big piece of advice for an addict is to get help, get support. And also for a non-addicted supporter might also consider having a support network. There are 500,000 support groups serving over 20 million people in the United States. And so you can always get support online, at meetings, through the hospital. And especially if you're in a relationship with somebody who has an addiction and you feel you can't protect yourself or you're intimidated or anything like that, then you, the supported family member or friend, need to get help, talk to a therapist, and learn about whatever your options are to protect yourself. Brad says love itself is an action, and that being hopeful a person can change can positively influence them. And Brad emphasizes those things. But I would say that, just my personal opinion, willing to talk about it, that I think there's a limit to that. Because every person knows that every child of an alcoholic parent loves their parent and hopes their parent will change and believes their parent will change if the parent says that they're going to change. So I think it's important to realize that you are dealing with an addict. So don't believe that more love or more hope can solve their problems, because really it's their self-love and their personal hope which is what is needed. You can't do it for them. Otherwise, there'd be no addicted parent anywhere. Never, ever believe that your love wasn't enough to save someone, because your love probably won't be. Now, that's the opposite of what Brad Lamb says. And what he says is certainly more positive. So I do think that it's good advice to keep it as positive as you can. We can talk about it. Another thing that he points out is there's a common misconception that addicts have to hit rock bottom before they can get help, and that's just simply not true. As soon as somebody notices a pattern, they can decide right then to start changing. And families and friends don't need to wait until someone has gotten drunk and driven over the mailbox before they start calling for change. If you do decide to talk with the addict and request changes, talk to the person as if they were rational. Say, this is what is at risk. It could be their job, their relationship with their children, their living situation, whatever it is. And this is what is at risk, and this is what is required of you. And these are reasonable guidelines and reasonable consequences. And that we care, and we have hope for you, and we are here for you. We're here for a check-in, but we hope that you also go outside and seek massive support. Join a group, get a therapist. And while we are not enmeshed with you to the point that we think our love and our hope is responsible for your changing, like it's not enough to make you change, because only you can change, and we hope that you will. That last part is my addition. So the work is to identify the thought problem patterns, and this is coming from that Danielle Candace Platter, sorry. So she says that for what she works with is helping people identify the thought patterns, the buried emotions, whatever that's driving the addictive behavior, so that people can change it. And that there are people who do get sober, and change is possible at every age. And a person does not have to be in crisis to begin changing or to change. And if there's small problems, catch them with small corrections. We can live with positive intention, proactively to create the lives that are healthy, emotionally strong, and filled with love and support. Okay, so as a church, we won't be meeting again until January 3rd. But on January 3rd, we're going to talk about goals and intentions for the new year. And I just want to, say that we hope that they're about health and support, and not only personally, but also giving back to the community type goals. We'll talk about that when we see each other. And goals that are all about setting intentions as opposed to trying to fix something that's broken. Okay, going back to the water talk, quit trying to fix me, I'm not broken, will be part of the theme. So I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and a happy new year. We'll make next year healthy and hopeful. And I'll close the way I always do, which is that atheists believe in good because good works in non-mysterious ways. Thank you.